In occupied France during World War II, one small village may have done more to fool the Nazis than any other place. Our story begins in 1943. Hitler was furious about the state of affairs. Britain and America were pounding Germany with daily air raids, and despite having invaded the Soviet Union 2 years earlier, it seemed that every time he turned around, Moscow was just a little bit closer. There was only one thing to do, Adolf thought. He would solve all of his problems by conquering new lands, specifically the island of Madagascar. It was there, according to a recent meeting with Mussolini, that they could find oil and other resources necessary for the German war machine. But first, he'd need to conquer Egypt, which meant taking over Vichy France. And there was only one problem with that plan. British forces were stationed on the Egyptian border. If Hitler wanted to get there, he'd have to go through the Suez Canal. The British had made it clear they would fight tooth and nail to prevent this from happening. So Hitler was going to need a foolproof plan. Luckily for him, the French collaborated closely with the Germans, so he knew just how to pull off this dangerous heist. The key was getting them across the Mediterranean undetected. Once the troops arrived in Vichy, they could take out the remaining allies, and the British would never see it coming. As the Germans got ready to pack up and set sail, they left their largest warships behind and brought along U-boats to make the journey. The Vichy government allowed them to use French ports, an option sadly taken advantage of by many nations across Europe during World War II. As the German ships prepared to depart, everything seemed to be going according to plan. But back in London, intelligence had gotten wind of the entire plot. Winston Churchill ordered the Royal Navy to intercept the fleet before they could reach Vichy. When the Germans found out what was happening, they called off the trip and drew up new plans. This time they'd have to go through Gibraltar undetected, a much more difficult task. Somehow the Germans managed to get their fleet into the Atlantic without being noticed. They split up their ships and began heading towards the French coast. At this point, Hitler had lost interest in Madagascar and was focused on just keeping his seat warm in Berlin. If the Allies noticed what he was doing, they would definitely stop it. His only hope now was a small coastal town called Olonne-sur-Mer, where he had placed one of his most trusted generals, Karl Donitz, with orders to construct a naval base. If they could get there unnoticed, they could launch attacks against the Allies while safely repairing their damaged vessels. This was the perfect solution, except for one major problem. The entire region was controlled by French resistance fighters who would never let the Germans get away with this. Meanwhile, the German fleet was closing in on their destination. The locals were terrified when they realized what was going on, but there was nothing they could do about it. That is, except for one group of brave civilians. They decided to do something crazy, fake an Allied invasion. This is how they did it. First, they contacted everyone nearby and told them to leave right away. Then they wrote, "Beware of mines" in chalk on the sidewalks, pretending the British were retreating. They even went so far as to create fake roadblocks and signs. Finally, they started making noise in the middle of the night to make it seem like the Allies were marching on the town. But how could they convince the Germans this was real? They needed to bring in some heavy hitters. Luckily for them, they knew exactly who to call. The Canadians, ever since the fall of France. Canadian soldiers had been training in secret, waiting for the day they could return to France and kick out the Germans. Now was their chance. As the sun came up, they got in their jeeps and drove through the streets pretending to be on a mission. They even went so far as to put up fake road signs, saying things like ammunition depot or medical supplies. It was the perfect disguise. But there was one more thing they needed. To sell this convincingly, they would need to create a fake command center. The locals helped them out by letting them use their homes. They decorated the insides with maps and documents that were clearly British. The operation was a success. The German troops took the bait and thought they were really under attack. They didn't stick around to find out any different. And within seconds, the Germans were gone, allowing the Allies to slip past them unnoticed. But they weren't completely out of the woods yet. German patrol boats still patrolled the waters near the coast, looking for any sign of the enemy. The Canadians were too well trained to take any chances. They created a diversion and sent some soldiers to sneak onto the docks. While the rest kept watch, the soldiers removed the German buoys so they wouldn't be able to navigate if they came back. It was a risky move, but it paid off. The Germans were forced to abandon their patrols and head back to base. But the French people weren't done just yet. They wanted to confuse the Germans even more. They wrote a letter to the local newspaper, telling everyone that the Germans had already been pushed back and that the Allies were coming soon. It was signed by a fake military leader named General Le. They even included a photo of a handsome general that looked just like someone the French people had seen fighting in the war before. It was too much for the Germans to handle. They began panicking, thinking they were surrounded. And then something truly remarkable happened. No one spilled the beans. Not a single person said anything about the fake invasion. Even after the war ended, there was a reason for this. The people were tired of living under the thumb of the Germans, and no one wanted to risk setting them off. At the time, collaboration was viewed negatively. But in the decades since, many people have come to realize it was simply a matter of survival. The Germans had seized control of the country and forced the citizens to choose sides. Many saw collaborating with the Germans as the lesser of two evils. Anyway, the ruse was almost discovered once. When German command got wind of the situation in Alanya and sent a plane to investigate, the pilot spotted the fake roadblocks and retreated, convinced he'd stumbled upon a real ambush. But when he reported back to command, no one believed him. They figured he must have seen the signs wrong. As the pilot was making his way back to the airfield, he flew directly over a downed transport plane full of Canadian paratroopers. Just imagine his surprise when he spotted hundreds of fully armed soldiers hiding in the trees. The pilot couldn't believe what he was seeing. But before he could report back to base, the engine sputtered and died. He tried to restart it, but it was too late. He'd run out of fuel and was forced to land in the middle of the ambush. The Canadians quickly disarmed him and took him prisoner. This might have blown the ruse, except that the pilot was badly injured and couldn't talk. By the time he recovered, the Canadians were gone and the Germans had taken over the area once again. When the Allies finally liberated France, the residents were overjoyed. That is, until they heard what was going to happen next. The Allies wanted to know who had helped the Canadians pull off such a daring stunt. Everyone was afraid that their neighbors would accuse them of collaborating with the enemy. In reality, everyone had been working together to deceive the Germans, and no one wanted to snitch on each other. But the Allies weren't going to take no for an answer. They forced the townspeople to vote on whether or not they wanted their collaborators punished. As you can probably guess, the vote failed. It became known as the Day of Silence. Not a single person gave up their friends and family. It turns out the whole charade had worked perfectly, and the Germans never figured out the truth. After the war ended, the people of Alone-sur-Mer went back to their lives, but they would never forget what they'd accomplished. Today, they celebrate the anniversary of the fake Allied invasion every year with a festival. They even held a ceremony at the town hall to honor the memory of the Canadian soldiers who participated in the event. For these brave people, it was simply a matter of survival. But for the rest of us, it will forever be a testament to the power of bravery and deception.